sat and talked about naming this place for years before we ever got home. We were sitting one evening at the kitchen table, and Kathy was always trying to come up with names to do with maple trees or orchard, sugar tree, or apple and fruit, because we got a little orchard back there too. And I said one evening, I was sitting there, I said, the one thing the Cove has always been blessed with. She said, well, yeah, a lot of trees. I said, no, rocks. I said, every place you look, there's rocks. So I said, we're just going to call it Rock Haven. She says, I like that. So that's how we got a name for it. Call it Rock Haven.
Maple syrup is a sweetener made from the sap of sugar maple trees. In cold climate areas, these trees store sugar in their roots before the winter, and the sap that rises in the early spring can be tapped and concentrated by evaporating much of the water content. Quebec, Canada produces most of the world's supply, but maple syrup making still thrives in Hardy County, West Virginia. Native American Indians processed maple sap for its sugar content long before the European settlers arrived in the region. Birch bark caught the sap and it was accumulated drop by drop. It was either concentrated by dropping hot cooking rocks into the bark or leaving them overnight to freeze so that the frozen water content could be removed. In the early stages of European colonization, the Native Americans showed the arriving colonists how to tap the trees during late winter and early spring and showed them how to make syrup and sugar. The Europeans revised the processing method somewhat with their more advanced technology. Often, whole families would move into the woods to collect and boil the sap. By the 1850s, the sugar shack arrived as we know it today. The process of making maple syrup continued to evolve. Around the time of the Civil War, syrup makers started using a flat, large metal pan as a more efficient way of boiling than a heavy iron kettle where much of the heat escaped around the sides. The technology remained much the same until the 1960s. Because the process is so labor-intensive, a system was developed to tap the trees and drain the sap directly to the evaporator house using a plastic tubing system. Vacuum pumps were then added to the tubing systems.
My granddad used to live right out across the hill here, Harry Combs, and they had a sugar camp out there back in the 30s and the 40s, early 40s. Now they would set up as high as 6, 8, 10 iron kettles, and they would cook all day and all night, all day, all night. They'd catch their water in wooden buckets. And they would pack it in there or drag it in on a sleigh with a horse. And then it went from that to a flat pan. And that's what Uncle Albert does up here. Well, that pan works the same as mine, but yet it's different. It's a complete different setup. They burn by wood, and it gets hot in those camps. I mean, you work, because it really gets hot. I would guess your temperature is probably going to average around 100, 105 degrees in there. Well, don't expect that when you go into my camp because you're going to freeze. My furnace is so airtight that the heat goes where it's supposed to underneath the pan and then from the pan out. So when we go through this, I'll show you how it works.
The process used at Rock Haven Maple Syrup Camp reflects this modern technology. About 70% of the water content is first removed before heating using a reverse osmosis technique. The sugar water is then heated in a nearly airtight furnace using diesel fuel.
And then we got home and we found out we still had a lot of maple trees, and then we knew we was going to get into it, not just a little bit. We thought, well, we'll just make a business out of this, and that's what we've done over the last 8 years. And it's not easy work. People think, your syrup prices are pretty high. Well, think what you want. Go make it. And I'll bet you won't sell for what I sell for. I hold my prices down. I'm way below all my competitors except for my Uncle Albert. He's a little bit cheaper than I am. But then he still burns firewood and I don't. I burn diesel. So I have to be a little higher than him. You know, and I'm not going to sit here and mention anybody else's sugar camp. I got a lot of friends from here clear to Vermont, New York, Quebec. They're all in the maple syrup business. They all make good syrup, but ain't none of it as good as mine. Of course, now, you know, all maple producers tell you that. Same story. They make the best.
Trees can be tapped year after year without damaging the trees, and it takes about 40 to 100 gallons of sap to produce just 1 gallon of syrup, depending on how sweet the water is.
Well, clear back to the Indians. They used to split the bark on the tree, and they'd take other bark and funnel that water into a little trough that they would cut out of wood or a log. And to start with, they would freeze it, let it freeze, and they'd throw the ice away and keep the sweet water. Well, as time went on, they evolved into where they would catch it in these hollowed out pails that they would make out of wood. And now they're not buckets like nothing like we've ever seen. But they would take that water someplace and put it in an area enclosed, whether it was rock or, I don't believe it was rock, I believe it was probably skin. Animal skins, they sewed together. They would build a fire beside of this, and not under it, but beside of it. They would heat those rocks, and they would always use small round rocks to the point where they'd almost be ready to crack, and they would put those in that animal skin and evaporate the water until they got sweet water. They actually made sugar. They would have it in little pouches that they would carry for quick energy. They knew what it was.
About 2,800 taps on 30 acres of land are currently at Rockhaven Maple Syrup Camp.
Well, last year we decided to upgrade the sugar camp. This past year, 2009, we started in October. We took the old lines, everything out of the woods, completely out. Everything went back in new. It's evolved in the last 8 years to the point where I had to do that if I wanted to stay modern or keep up with the times, whatever you want to call it, you know. So there was really a lot involved in it. I had to go through the woods and take out all the dead trees. I took out a lot of trees that weren't maple trees because the tops will break out of them, like poplar and stuff like that, you know. So you don't want that falling on your lines. That whole process is still going on. We started in October and we still have not got that done. We have approximately 3,000 taps out today, and there's 1,000 more that we want to bring online. So, I mean, by putting out the lines, there's a lot more involved to it. You make a lot of firewood for your neighbors, you know, because I don't use firewood. So I give it away. I don't charge people for it because I don't think it's right. If they need it, they're more than welcome to come and get it because I'll just give it to them. Matter of fact, I even use my tractor to load their trucks. You know, so I try to help out as much as I can because it's a help to me. It's gone. It makes my place look better. And that's, you know, like the maple trees, the only critter I have that is a real downfall to maple business, everybody would think, well, that's got to be the squirrel. Well, I got news for you, it's not. You got one out there that's a whole lot harder on you than any squirrel. And it's going to be one that's going to surprise you. It's a deer. Because he's constantly trimming your trees. You ain't never going to get no new ones. Because as fast as they come up out of the ground, the deer population in this area is so heavy, you cannot find a little bitty maple tree anywhere. Matter of fact, you're hard pressed to find a little tree of any kind. You know, so that's probably the biggest enemy you got right now in the woods. lines up here. The inch and quarter lines carry sap. The 2 3/4 inch lines are what we call dry lines. They let the gas release that's in those lines. Because if without that, they'll actually stop running because it becomes vapor locked. So this is a new process. If you look on the side of that tree, that's actually a little bitty booster that actually helps it keep from air locking. But we also have shutoff valves on every one of them. Every line that comes out of here, the 3/4 inch line, has a shutoff valve on it for a reason. If we have a problem with that line, we just shut it off and we can continue running without losing anything. You know, and the green lines, you look at them up here, they're actually our sap lines. They're 1/4 inch. They come from tree to tree. We try not to get over 8, maybe 10 trees on each line. Maximum length is 100 feet. But you need the snow. You got to have snow to get moisture in the ground. It helps. It really does. More moisture you got in the ground, more water you're going to get. My system is set up totally different than anybody's that I know of around close. I use a vacuum system. And when I say vacuum system, it's just like in a milking parlor, except I'll pull a higher pressure than what the vacuum system set up for the milkers. So this comes right straight off of the vacuum. That's a releaser on top. It drops 30 gallons of water every time it opens up. This tank will hold 1,100 gallons of water. From this tank, it goes back up through this building. And we have a tank here that we put in so the RO runs easier and better. So this is just a little holding tank, so when we start flushing the water through to the silver tank, it comes up here back into the RO, and from here down into the silver tank. So that actually gives us an opportunity to clean this water one more time before it gets in that tank. This valve is closed. That lets the water in to the front pan. This is the one that makes the syrup. The second thing I'll do is I'll come around the other side and I'll turn the valve on in the back the same way. Now this controls the water that comes in from outside. That's a 1-inch line. So there's 1 inch of water running into this tank all the time through a 1-inch line. There's a switch right here where you can turn it this way to drain. That way it's an automatic. That way in the middle it's manual, it can't do anything. I usually keep it in the manual until I get my first drop. That's the idea. Now I got a little bottle I keep setting right here. This is called defoamer. Syrup, when you cook it, water really foams up. It really boils. Put a couple drops of that in there, foam's gone. Breaks bubbles down. That stuff all cooks off and goes into the atmosphere. So it's not in the syrup. You can have it tested. You'll not find anything in this syrup. That's the way I want it. I want a pure maple syrup. When I say that, that's what I mean. Now this thing, I heat this up to 220 to 222, 225 before I'll hit this range. Now I took it off of my furnace over there. It was almost syrup. So I don't take long over here. It takes me within an hour I'm canning or less. We'll take it out of here. We'll draw a bucket full. Now if you look in here, that is white powder. It's called Filter Aid. I'll mix 1 bucket of this and I'll bring it over here. I'll run this bucket clear through the filter press. What it does is it lodges against the filters. It takes out any particles from there on that comes through the syrup. None of this ever ends up in the syrup. process doesn't work a little bit better. Here comes the syrup back through, and you can already see it's clear. We'll stop right here because we got enough to can. I won't make you wait until I go on with this. So I'll move over here to the canning station. I'm not going to actually can. I'm going to let my wife and Aaron do the canning.
Oh.
I'll give you some history. I'll go clear back to when the cabin was built. That cabin behind me was built in 1780. Kathy's great-great-grandmother was born there. You know, and that cabin was occupied up until 1905. And then they built the main house down here, which we have now and we've restored. So, I mean, it's got a lot of history in it. We're going to rebuild it. And our goal is to put a sign on there that says general store when we're running maple business. When people walk into that place, they're not just going to see a little store. I have collected artifacts, antiques for the past 8 years. When you walk into that store, you're going to see the old bean pot cooking. You're going to see kerosene lamps. It's going to be like you walk back in time. And that's our goal. This is not mine. And I make that clear to anybody that comes to visit me. You look around and you say, well, Buck and Kathy sure got a lot. No, this is not mine. I'm a steward. This is God's. And He gave it to me, and I'll take care of it till somebody else gets it. Then it'll be up to them. This is God's mountain. And that's what I tell everybody.